everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, the Customer Data Platform, Solving Problems and Driving Digital Transformation. Today's presentation focuses on customer data platforms, and during the presentation, you'll get a better understanding of how CDPs assemble and distribute customer data, what problems a CDP can help the marketer solve, and the key ways to using a CDP in driving a business's digital transformation. Our webcast will last approximately 60 minutes and will be recorded for your on-demand viewing after the event's over. Please feel free to enter your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. We have two CDP experts presenting today, David Robb and Adam Corey. David is the founder of the CDP Institute and principal at Robb Associates, and he specializes in marketing technology and analytics. Adam leads Telium's marketing and is responsible for driving awareness around the power of Telium. He has over 13 years of experience in digital analytics, marketing, and business development. Okay, let's get this presentation started. David, Adam, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Megan, and thank you to everyone for joining today. We're excited to talk about this idea of customer data platforms and really the macro concept of digital transformation and really where we are today, both as digital practitioners and leading in our own industries, but also where we are from consumers, maybe after 5 o'clock when we become normal people again. So I thought it'd be interesting to take a step back and think about where expectations exist with customers and how well we're doing as digital practitioners of meeting that need. I think as marketers, we certainly face a lot of challenges today, and that really starts with what customer expectations are all about. So 99% of companies out there believe that achieving a single customer view, and that is a customer view that exists across really every touch point, not just digital, but every touch point that a business engages their customers. 99% of companies believe that achieving this single view is important for their business. And I've seen a few different stats. This is one of the ones that I think provides a bit more hope out there. Is about 24% of the companies out there say they have a single view today. Customers really have high expectations for that single view. I think if we think about where we are as individuals after 5 o'clock, we don't necessarily see the divisions in what happens between how I interact in store or on the phone or via digital channels with the brand. But certainly those of us who make our living in this industry know that there's a lot that goes into it. So looking more on the consumer side, I think there's some great stats here around where this gap in expectation really exists. And in a lot of ways, the technologies that we've been using for quite some time aren't necessarily filling the need. And if we look at some of these great stats here from a few different organizations, 73% of consumers, 3/4, are likely to switch brands if they're receiving an inconsistent level of service across departments and channels. 87%, so almost everybody of customers think brands need to put more effort into providing a consistent experience. And then again, 86% of buyers will actually pay more for better customer experience, but only 1% of customers feel that their expectations are consistently being met. So this is lots of people out there raising their hands saying, I don't think that we're getting what we expect to be getting. And I think one of the interesting aspects to this is, when I started my career, retailers had to compete with similar retailers. Now we have to compete with any other digital experience that's being created, even if I'm not in that particular space. Maybe there's some really great app that's focused on travel and hospitality, and I'm a retailer, but they've upped the game for what can be done in digital, and now I have to think about upping my game. So the landscape is completely changing, and our expectations as individual consumers are growing every day. So we thought we'd take a moment here to maybe ask a question. So we'll pop a poll here right now, but we wanted to know from everyone, do you think you have the right tools in place to achieve digital transformation? So go ahead, we've just popped this up on your screen right now. Feel free to read through the responses and chime in. David, while folks are voting, curious what you're seeing in this change in consumer expectations and really where the customer data platform sits to help solve some of that?
Well, the change in expectations you see in every survey imaginable, and we collect them, and I have a stack, 6 feet high in my office of those things, and they all show just this increasing demand among consumers for personalization, and they also show that if you do personalization wrong, to get cranky. So you really have to kind of walk a fine line. I mean, in terms of the tools that people need to do this stuff, the CDP is one way of building a customer database. We'll talk about where it fits into the scheme of other ways of building customer databases later. But that customer data is the center of everything. You can't personalize your experiences. You can't tailor it to what customers you want, and you can't meet that expectation unless you've pulled all their data together, and including data from external systems, and assembled it and kind of made sense of it, and then used that to guide all your interactions through all the channels. So the CDP is absolutely playing a critical role in meeting those expectations.
Could not agree more. Why don't we go ahead and we'll stop the voting right there, and let's look at what we're seeing here. So we actually have a tie for the top one. So a lot of people out there, 38% are saying yes, we've started our journey to achieve digital transformation, and then an equal number are saying no, but we need to do it. So we see a lot of people that either they've just started their journey or they know that they need to start their journey. And then 23% are saying, nope, we haven't, we're not even there yet. So I think that's really where we see the industry kind of break down in terms of stats to say, hey, here's where we are in terms of knowing that we need to go in this direction. But maybe for various reasons, there's been a hurdle along the way that's prevented us from getting there. So why don't we continue? So thinking about what digital transformation really is, there was one kind of key stat that's really popped out to me, and this is, I think, in a lot of ways, the definition of digital transformation. But a survey done earlier this year really found that about 70% of business unit leaders in organizations felt that their departments had become too fixed. Either they were built before some of the needs of today were really present, or for other reasons, and because they were too fixed, they really became barriers to effective coordination. I think I see this quite a bit with organizations that have bought their own tools to analyze customer data or to engage customers, but those tools weren't designed to talk to one another, and so therefore our employees and team members that are responsible for different parts of the customer experience just don't have a reason to engage with one another. And this is one of those things that, as we look at just what is happening globally with how companies are transforming or needing to transform, this will really impact every aspect of business and really in a lot of ways, really every aspect of our lives, because it really means I'm going to have to look at inside of my organization, what is the culture, how do I train and communicate, how do I organize my teams, what technology, integration really should be core to the technology investments that I start to make, and then making sure that I'm not siloing my insights. If I'm only understanding how someone interacts with my web channel, well, that doesn't really tell me much about this person. It tells me a little bit about this particular web visit today, but maybe not as much as I'd like about holistically who this person is across my entire organization. But there's a lot of money to be made. In the martech space, where I think a lot of us have spent a good amount of our time, the martech landscape has exploded. This is Scott Brinker, who tracks this every year from chiefmartech.com. Over the last 6 or so years, has charted the number of technology companies that are out there helping to solve marketing needs and customer experience and analytics needs in digital channels, has grown from a few hundred to several thousand now. So if you're wondering why you're getting so many phone calls from people trying to sell you marketing technology, it's because there's a lot of people trying to sell marketing technology. But this puts a lot of pressure on us as individual marketers and organizations to think about, hey, there is some great technology out there, and there's some really innovative ideas and experiences that I can create, but I've got to think about how do I make these things talk to one another, because without being able to coordinate that customer data and coordinate my action and how I want to approach and execute on my strategy, I'm really not meeting the ultimate customer needs here. So again, more stats here just on this gap that most of the companies out there know that they need this, know that they need all this data together, but there's really a drought when it comes to customer data, and there's a big drought when it comes to customer data. Lots of people say it's important, but again, very few people have it in place today. And David, this is really where I think in a lot of ways we look to you as somebody who's been preaching from the mountaintops for years that this is an area that we need to go, and I think we're all starting to catch up with you now. So I'd love to turn this over to you to talk a little bit about this concept of what a customer data platform is and really how it can help us solve some of these challenges.
Absolutely, Adam, my pleasure. And hi, everybody. Sort of just showing up here. So let's talk about customer data. And let's start with the fact that there are, in fact, quite a number of ways to get that unified customer view. And yes, I love customer data platforms, but I am not so silly as to imagine it's the only view. So if you think of the different ways you can organize your company's data, your marketing technology stack, if you must use that term, you could just have your silos, which things don't talk to each other, and that's obviously where most of us are, in fact, today to some degree or other, and it doesn't unify your data. So if you can't unify your data, you can't get a complete picture of the customer, and then you can't personalize it effectively, let alone coordinate to give the same treatments across channels. So that's sort of, we don't want to do that one. One approach to unifying the data is to just put in place some sort of a hub thing that doesn't really unify the data, but then just shares the data between systems. So a transaction happens in your web, and you grab a copy of that transaction, and you push it into your email system, and you push it into your CRM system. So they all sort of have their own little private copy of the data, but theoretically they're all getting copies of everybody else's data too. So now you have a bunch of different databases that are theoretically all complete. Well, the chances of them all being consistent are pretty much close to zero, vanishingly small. The chances that they're all current, it just ain't going to happen. A lot of data, swishing back and forth, shuttling back and forth in that model. A lot of reasons that model is anything but optimal. Although, the pro is that it's actually pretty easy to put that in place. Customer data platform says, let's build a single customer database. Let's get the data from those different systems as it happens and put it in one place, not in a bunch of different systems, and then all have all those systems look at that data, that same database, so it's inherently giving all the systems a consistent view. You could take that a next step up and go to something called a marketing cloud or a journey orchestration engine, Joe, that says let's not only have a unified database, let's also have a unified decision layer that decides who gets which treatment. Great, love it. Now I have this one system trying to do these two things, so it better be a really great system, because if it doesn't do one or the other of them well, I'm kind of stuck with it. So there's a problem when I try to do more in a single system. And honestly, a lot of these systems that claim to do that, a lot of the marketing clouds are nowhere near as integrated as you would like to believe and as the vendors would like you to believe. So it's more aspirational in some ways than a real option for you. And then the extreme again is let's have one system do everything, including all of our interactions, all of our website, all of our email, all of our CRM, all of our call center, all of our mobile apps, all that. Have that in one fabulous, one thing that's all marketing suite, which would be really great if such a thing existed. The problem is there's always some new channel that comes in that the suite vendors haven't put in, or maybe their CMS or their CRM or their email system really isn't the best in the world, but if you're in the suite, you're sort of kind of stuck with it. So there are, any of these work, and actually if you look at surveys, how people do these things, you'll see that there are people who are quite happy with every one of these solutions, but we see the CDP as one that is a particularly productive and good solution to have. So, which leads to the question, well, what is this CDP thing anyhow, right? Definition, according to the CDP Institute, we should know, right, is CDP is a marketer-controlled system that builds a persistent, unified customer database that's accessible to external systems. So what that means, we'll actually talk about. We'll parse that in a little bit, but if you want to just think about the mechanics of it, what technically or functionally a CDP system does, it kind of has three big pieces. Okay, it gets data from source system and it loads it, and it does some standardization and transformation to sort of make it all consistent, because product IDs in this system may not be product IDs in that system, and other things may also be inconsistent, or addresses may be inconsistent. It then links the customer identities, which again can be different in different systems. I have my cookie over here, my email over there, my phone number over there. We want to get them all together so we know those are all really Adam. And then we're going to aggregate and index, and once we've unified the data, once we've unified the identities, then unify the data, and then do some processing on it to make it a little more useful. And then we're going to expose it to the other systems, because the other systems don't necessarily want to look at the raw data. They might want to look at indexes or summaries, or they just might need it organized in different ways. So those are the fundamental functionalities that you see in a CDP system. Now, that's nice, but the real question is, what's so great about that? And I think we're going to let Adam go back and answer that question.
Well, I'm going to start. I have lots of questions for you here, David, over the next little bit. But really, taking a page, literally, I think taking a page from you, David, in how to define and how to think about a customer data platform. One of the things that I think you've helped us as an industry start to think about is really, what does that look like? So, marketers are more in control. This is a solution where they get to decide and are not necessarily having to pull data from other teams and systems. It's a platform that is really designed for their needs to build and empower the different vendors and technologies that they're using. It's packaged software. It's a system that I can buy that's purpose-built for this, as opposed to a custom in-house build, something cobbled together. And I think in a lot of ways, one of the most powerful aspects of this is it is unified. It's looking at, you mentioned in your diagram just a moment ago, this is all of my sources. And by sources, we mean, what are the touch points that I'm engaging my customers on? That could be my website, my mobile application. It can be my offline data. It could be loyalty program data. Really, whatever data that you have. What's so really beautiful in a lot of ways about what customer data platforms are designed to solve is they're not predisposed to thinking about one particular channel or one way of looking at things. They're really designed to say, hey, we know you have lots of different data in lots of different formats and systems. And David, to your point, there may be lots of different identifiers that exist out there that describe who somebody is. And sometimes I think it's easy for us to get caught up and maybe fixate for a moment on even just the word customer to say, well, some of the folks that are in my universe aren't yet a customer, or maybe I don't know who they are yet. And that's where, David, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about, in some ways it may just be a cookie ID or an anonymous identifier because someone is really early in their relationship with me, but they're still a person. And it would be helpful if I can understand that individual as a person, maybe just in one or two channels to get started, but as their relationship grows and they feel comfortable to share their information with me about who they are or purchase from me, I can not only understand who that person is when they purchase or sign up as a lead or buy an insurance policy or get a quote, but I'm also able to stitch back and link back that data to what I knew about them before, what led to that, so I can gain better insights into what that more holistic journey looks like. Persistence is key in lots of parts of life, but in this case as well, because my data is something that is stored over time, but I like to think about this as something that really gains value and equity over time. In a lot of ways, I think we get caught up, those of us who work in marketing or building customer experience, we focus a lot on what we're building and how we're executing towards an experience that we're building. But a lot of times we're not necessarily thinking about one of the things that's unique to my business, and in a lot of ways, the most valuable thing that I may be generating over time is my relationship with my customer and the data that's generated from there. Because inside of that data is the history of that relationship. It's what they care about. It's where they've raised their hand to say, hey, I really want to focus on this and not this. It's problems that they've had in one channel that maybe they seek to solve in another. This is something that is ripe with opportunity, and something that I think as organizations, it's important for us not only to meet those customer expectations that exist out there today, but also just to make sure that we're building something that's differentiated in our own businesses, to make sure that we're doing something that's more compelling because we have and we take advantage of the data that has been generated from our own customer relationships. But there's a C in CDP because it is ultimately about the person and the customer, and that's because this is about understanding who the individuals are and thinking less in terms of campaign performance and click-throughs and sessions on my website, and more about the people and understanding how this relates to individuals. So having a platform that is purpose-built to think about this as individuals that exist out there. And then making sure that this data is detailed, rich, and most importantly, accessible. I think this is one of the big questions that we hear a lot of times from organizations that are looking at some of the different opportunities and options that they have out there with managing data. And there certainly are enterprise data warehouses and other solutions that exist out there, but those aren't necessarily designed to integrate with other systems. They may be great for doing analysis or storing data, but they're not really designed to help me action on that data. So let's take this one step further. You know, David, I thought this would be I'd love to hear some of the thoughts from you around the advantages here. We talked a little bit about some of these, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe any areas that I left out here in how you think about what separates CDPs from some of the other things that marketers have tried, or some of the other approaches that may exist out there.
Well, I think that you know, there are a few key things, and what we tried to do in these slides here was, you know, the first one before was kind of functions, and this is, you know, benefits, is theoretically what's going on here. So there, you know, each of those pieces of the definition, you know, has a specific thing, a value that it provides. So again, marketer control, you know, it means it's more responsive to marketers, and the system being a packaged software. Packaged software is easier to build. You deploy it faster. There's less risk. You get a lot of value from you know, the knowledge of the people who built it and so on. So down the road, identity resolution actually was a question that came in about someone asked how they handle identity management. I've heard a unified key is needed in the loading process. So let's address that question right here, which is to say that there are a lot of different CDP systems out there, and they differ very broadly. And this actually is one of the areas that they differ in. So some of the CDPs create a unified customer key from sort of scratch. Others actually haven't built that in, but they usually will plug into a third-party piece of software that builds that identity key. So it depends on the system. It depends on your use case. To be honest, some people that's really important. If you're dealing with customer data, you know, where you already have a customer identity and everything kind of goes through that, then having that sort of identity building thing isn't quite as important. So it really depends both on the product and on your use case. So, but generally, one way or the other, you're going to have to unify that data. Persistence is another really important thing. If you go back to the diagram, we'll have the data hubs that you're just sort of shuffling data back and forth. One of the big problems with that is you don't have a persistent data, so things like trends. You have no place to find trends if you don't keep a persistent history. So there's some real very concrete kind of applications that are made possible by the structure of the CDP. So could go on for hours, but maybe we won't.
I mean, we can. We can do an all-day webinar.
There you go. I'd be fine with that.
I wonder how many people would sign up for that. Maybe that'll be our next poll. So just all day, let's just go through every question you ever want to know about CDPs, but we're afraid to ask. One other, David, I'm glad that you brought up the question that came in around identity management. I think that's a really interesting concept, and earlier this year, I had the pleasure of having Joe Stanhope from Forrester talk about identity resolution at our conference in New York. And one of the comments that he made is, he sees a future where identity data and identity resolution would be something that would even be on balance sheets. I mean, as an idea for organizations to say this really is something that there is value in, and there's a monetary value that exists with this. But for me, I think where we look at identity is because, and you brought this up too, around some of the different approaches that can be taken with managing my marketing ecosystem. Things are changing, and there's always a new channel that's coming up. I'm wearing a watch that has apps on it right now. I didn't know that would be a thing a few years ago. Maybe I did from Dick Tracy days. But this is something where getting fixed with one way that I have to approach a primary key, or that I have to have one identifier, that's not, in a lot of ways, a sustainable approach. It's really more around, from the Telium perspective and from my perspective, having an approach to identity resolution that looks at the long part of the journey, from cookies and maybe social identifiers, maybe it's email addresses as well, but giving you the ability as organizations to determine, what is our matrix of stitching together what this person looks like, and then I can come up with probably the more pressing challenge. If I have the technology that's solving my identity resolution strategy, now I've got to actually make sure that I'm providing enough value in the experiences that I'm building for consumers that make them want to share information about themselves. If I can't get people to authenticate or share something about them for whatever reason, well, that's going to be the top priority once the data technology is in place.
Yeah, Adam, let me just follow up on that, just because I think you raise a really good point here, which is that there's always going to be a new identifier. There's always going to be some new thing that happens that we have to incorporate. And one of the reasons that you take a CDP and you separate it from your other systems is to have that flexibility. The only thing that we know is that things are going to continue to change, and probably at a faster and faster pace. So it's really important that people design their marketing technology structures, their architecture, their stack, whatever you want to call it, to accommodate and be flexible. And one way you do that is you break it up into components. So if there's a piece of it that has to change, or a piece of it that has to adapt, you can change or adapt that piece of it without having everything be one big thing that's brittle and kind of fractures the minute there's some little change needed. So that's a really important point, and new identifiers is absolutely part of that. There's always going to be new channels that have new identities, and you have to find some way to easily just accommodate that within your structure without starting again from scratch.
100%. And we'll skip ahead to the next slide. We'll send links to some additional stories from brands that are thinking about this in their own organizations. I'll highlight one because we're just talking about change, and Domino's, a wonderful customer that we work with, spoke recently on making data a first-class citizen. And as David, as you're just talking about how much is changing, and we don't know in a lot of ways what the future holds. I consider myself a big old tech geek and early adopter, but the fact that I now, when I walk into my house, talk to something that can order pizza and tell me about the news and change the lights and unlock my door, I mean, it's insane. But that's where we are today, and we're just barely scratching the surface with this. But embedded in what I'm doing right there are data points, things about my relationship. And I think for a company like Domino's, this is something that they're able to build completely new experiences. And I think in a lot of ways I'm viewing them more as a tech company or an innovator than just a pizza company. It doesn't hurt that their buffalo chicken pizza is amazing. And it comes to my house really quickly when I just say something out in the air. But that's where I think having this holistic approach that is future-proof, that is designed to embrace change, that's really why we get so passionate about what a CDP can be, because it allows you to get there. It helps you remove some of the silos, or at least connect some of the silos that exist in your organization, allows you to work with some of the smart people that sit in different parts of the house and think about what your customer really wants, put them at the center of their strategy, and build some really cool stuff. So David, why don't we turn it over to you here, because I think earlier on in the conversation we talked about there are a ton of technologies, over 5,000 martech companies out there, technologies that are solving really cool problems or creating really cool opportunities. But CDPs sometimes it can get either confused or people want to think about maybe other solutions that exist out there on the market as maybe solving some of these. So let me turn it over to you to help dispel some of the myths or clear up some of the confusion.
Absolutely. And again, if you want to think back to that diagram we had earlier with the different architectures, this is really another way of looking at that. Again, starting from the CDP definition. The CDP definition is very carefully crafted. Spent much time on agonizing over every word in that thing, and we still at the CDP Institute debate, whether some words should change or not. So it's crafted really to carefully distinguish the CDP from other things. So let's just walk through what other solutions are again. Because CDP is often confused with other ways of unifying customer data or other things that store unified customer data, and it really is its own little beast. And the red dots here mean that it's not done. Incidentally, black dot means it's something that is done. So the CDP, of course, has all black dots except for the last row. Get to that in a minute. Data warehouse looks a lot like a CDP, but it's not a package system. Data warehouses and data lakes are custom systems. Expensive, slow, risky, lots of issues. Data warehouse projects that failed are, of course, legendary and legion. So, that's the big difference. A data management platform, DMP, many of you are familiar with, probably the most often confused with a CDP. DMPs just are basically cookie pools, and they're really built very specifically to do advertising audiences for online display advertising. They don't build that really complex, detailed data. That's simply not what they store. They can't, because you can't be quick enough to do what you need to do for display advertising if you have that kind of a level of detailed data. So DMPs are great, but they're for something else. Data hubs, tag management, we talked about that a little. They don't store persistent data. They just shuffle the data back and forth between different systems. They may themselves store persistently, but any given system won't necessarily have a complete view. And they also really don't have that identity management built in most cases. That's simply not what you look to a data hub to do. Marketing automation products, MAP, systems, again, they and CRM really, same situation, that they manage the data they manage. A lot of data originates in those systems, and that's great, but they're not necessarily all that good at unifying and bringing in data from other systems, and they're rarely open so that other systems can access their data. Most of them do have APIs that allow data access, but the minute you get under the hood, you realize most of those APIs are very, very limited in what they permit. So by no means an adequate solution in most cases. Marketing clouds and journey orchestration engines, again, may or may not allow open access to their data, and there can be some other issues. The journey orchestration engines don't even necessarily have a persistent database. That last row, the decision and delivery one, just to be clear, folks, there are other issues in the world than just packaged and unified data and persistence and access. Some CDPs actually have things in terms of orchestration and even in some cases of delivery, things like sending emails. Some don't, and again, very much dependent on what your particular needs are. But just to make the case, again, that there's a wide variety in systems that qualify as CDPs. We've counted, 45, close to 50 probably by now, vendors who use the label and who we consider to be using the label with some legitimacy. It's a big group, and it's a huge range of what they do and don't do. So just in case you weren't confused enough, we'll put this in a Venn diagram for you visual thinkers out there. And this is either fabulous or horrible, depending on just who you are. But, we have our three major attributes, again, marker to control unified data, access. CDP does all three. Those other things, most of them do one, or in some cases two. So if this helps, that's great. If this doesn't help, just pretend you never saw it. And maybe we'll drill down a bit here on the DMP in particular, just because, again, that's the one that's most often confused with CDP. And, DMPs mostly have anonymous data. They're really just mostly cookie IDs as opposed to multiple identifiers. They really don't do much identity resolution. They are really structured differently, basically a flat file in most cases. They're built for speed, not analytics. They really built for single purpose. So, beating this is a dead horse at this point to beat it, but they're not the same thing. They're really not the same thing. That's the point here. They're really and truly not the same thing. Don't get them confused. Let's talk about.
So I thought we've talked a lot about data in a lot of ways for the existing tools and programs I'm running, maybe experiences that I'm building. There's an increasing focus on data protection and privacy, and I think this is another benefit of what a CDP, now I have too many acronyms in the head, what CDPs can really help to provide. For those of you that maybe aren't familiar with some of the regulation changes in Europe, there is a new regulation coming into view next year called GDPR, which really focuses on how companies are responsible for the data that they collect and gives new rights to individuals in Europe about their ability to access that information, understand when there's an issue with that data maybe being breached, giving them the ability to amend or change or destroy or erase that data as well. And it's really something that underscores the need to have a central system that exists that can help you make sense of this. Because otherwise, if you're using 30-plus technologies to build your customer experience, and that has many different ways of handling customer data, it becomes a rather onerous task to think through how do I have a singular approach to handling and governing data when I have lots of different places where that goes. But I think whether or not there's government or regulation that is focusing on data protection, I really think this focus is coming from all angles, where consumers are increasingly demanding protection either because what they're hearing in the news, or maybe they're using things like ad blockers, or there are advocacy groups that are raising awareness, or just data breaches that are raising awareness. I know, me personally, my entire life is digitized. Everything about what I care about, what I do, how I communicate, all right there. So I want to make sure that as a consumer, my data is responsibly handled. That's a pretty natural and a growing realization that most of us have out there. We have some of the providers that we work with that are really focused maybe a bit more on their gardens and protecting what they're focused on. As I mentioned, some of the regulation changes or things that are happening out in the government sphere. And then, businesses know that, as data and customer privacy are so linked to brand trust and my health as an organization, I need to look at what are some of the things that I should be doing as an organization just to mitigate some of that risk. So when we think about, again, GDPR, and again, GDPR, it is something that's European and focused on people in Europe. But if we think about a lot of us, many of us on this call may focus just in the U.S. Others of us may focus on a global audience, even if it's a minority outside of the U.S. but I think what we're seeing from most organizations today is to look at whether or not they focus in Europe primarily, look at what GDPR is really spelling out and making that our directional goal for what we're doing across the board. Whether or not we have similar approach in the U.S. or what have you, I think having the approach and the guidance of what GDPR lays out really gives us good direction for what's in the best interest or the spirit of fostering really beautiful, sustainable customer relationships. So GDPR, it's all about making sure that you have documented processes and governance in place, clear consent around data collection. As I mentioned, there's individual rights to review, correct, erase, the portability of that data. It has details on how I can use and retain that data. And it also has this idea of when I build technology and I build experiences, I need to be thinking about privacy in that design phase. And apologies for the plane that's flying overhead. It's an active area here at Helium. But I think that last concept of privacy by design is a good thing to think about as we put so much of our energy into handling customer data and working with data. We've got to make sure that privacy is central to that. And to do so, I need to have that central repository. I need to have process and documentation that talks about how my organization uses that technology. And that's where I think CDP vendors who are solely focused in the area of customer data can really help provide expertise and guidance in this new world that is so dependent on and leverages customer data, but make sure that it does so in a sustainable and responsible way. So I know we have a few questions coming in, but we wanted to pop over one more question to the audience, and this is really around for those of you that you're attending this webinar, you're curious about a CDP, you may have questions around it. We'd love to ask you, if you haven't already put a CDP in place, we'd love to know what's stopping you from deploying. What questions do you have? Are there particular things that have popped up that maybe you're still looking for guidance on? We compiled in the next slide, which we'll get to right after the poll, some of the top objections, questions, things that we hear inside of organizations that are key. But we wanted to go ahead and hear from you first before we move forward. So, David, I know we'll save some of the magic for the next slide, but as you think about going back a few years and helping to evangelize or really starting to evangelize around CDP, how have you seen some of the objections or concerns or questions really evolve over the last few years?
Well, I think that the most interesting thing has been that, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I coined the term CDP in 2013, I think. So that's 4 years ago. Nobody knew that this was an option. I mean, forget about the term. They just didn't know such systems existed under any name. And really just in the past year, CDP has kind of become something that a lot of people have at least heard of. They don't necessarily understand exactly what a CDP is, which is why we just spent so much time going over the definitions. But they kind of have this notion, oh yeah, there's something out there that can help me to manage my customer data. So that's a huge step forward, because they knew before that they needed to manage their customer data. They need to unify it, but they didn't necessarily know that they had a choice, right? So now I have a choice. Not only do I have a problem, but there's a solution to this problem. That was sort of news, and obviously good news. I do wonder, Adam, so we have a couple of questions that came in that are specific that maybe we should address them.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, do you want to go ahead and grab a couple of those and we'll start talking about them?
Yeah, because one of the interesting ones was somebody said detailed data not always helpful. How do you aggregate data to build profile scores, clusters, next best action? Is that part of the CDP, or do you need an additional system? And the answer is a definite maybe. Sad to say, most CDPs actually do have some capabilities along those lines. I mean, but some have very deep capabilities for things like built-in machine learning, predictive modeling. Others will do basic segmentation and let you push that data out. So it's a little varies from system to system, but generally speaking, it's part of a CDP to some extent.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think from you're speaking as someone at a CDP. I think for us having the focus on getting the data, you're really in line with that diagram that you showed, David, which is around getting the data in, making sure that you're transforming the data. And by that I mean, if there are new data points that could be derived from some of the raw event data that's coming in, that helps me build new maybe scores, detailed attributes, profiles, etc. That's really where we see a CDP as being powerful, so that with my other solutions, I can make sure that my email system or my website personalization or my recommendation solution, the technology that I'm using to take action has the right information about the person that's in front of them, and that information is up to date and in real time. And that can be something, if you think about even as broadly as someone purchasing something in a shockingly non-digital channel, having that information shared in a single place that can then update the other technologies that I use allows you to maybe do something as simple as stop retargeting or pushing this one product on this person who has already purchased this, but then allows you to think about maybe there are things, very simple things that I can do around just reducing my media spend. If I'm an organization that maybe sells once or twice a year a particular product, and someone comes in and maybe does some of that research online but then converts over the phone, well, I want to go ahead and make sure that I'm no longer spending my AdWords dollars and advertising and social programs on that person for a few months because they've converted. But I can't do that if that data is not synced up altogether.
Absolutely, and just to clarify even further on that one point, what the CDP will do is it will almost always take the mass of NoSQL data sitting down there in Hadoop or wherever you're keeping it, and at least make it organized and indexed and present it so you can do like a SQL query against it. All right, that is an important transformation because it's really hard to work with that NoSQL data just down there in the big data store. It's just a mass of details. So almost every CDP, in fact, every CDP will at least take that level of organization to make the data accessible. That's part of the definition of making the data accessible, is you put it in a format that other systems can access. And then you do the other stuff that Adam was just talking about to make it even more useful by adding summaries and trends and stuff.
Absolutely. David, I know there are a few questions. I kind of think, but there's one that kind of popped out to me, and I don't know if there's another that popped out to you, but there's a question around what about tracking behavior on video and animations? Is that part of this as well? And my answer on that is absolutely. I mean, from where a CDP should be, and really how we approach it here at Telium, is any part of customer behavior should be a part of this. That might be videos or animations on your website. That's key to us really at Telium for the way that we think about everyone here. If you're watching our videos, that is so rich with information around not only that you clicked on this video, but you're watching it, it's showing engagement. And we'll up-level some of those metrics to say if someone watches videos more than they read our blog, we'll what we call badge someone or put a label on someone to say, hey, this person is a fan of videos. And even something as simple as that allows you to say, regardless of all the great rich data that's available underneath that around what videos and how long they watch and on what channels, all that kind of stuff, this person likes videos more than they like to read blog pages or articles. So maybe when I have other great videos that are on a topic, I'm going to prioritize this for this person because that's what they've demonstrated that they care about. And that's what's possible, I think, when you start to think about what customer behavior is, when you can act on it. David, anything to add there?
It reinforces the point I made earlier about new channels coming in and new data types. Soon we'll be tracking virtual reality events, and we'll be tracking this, and we'll be tracking that, and the CDP just is designed to accommodate whatever you throw at it. Yeah, it's going to track video. Yeah, it's going to track VR. Yeah, it's going to track smell-o-vision when we get there. Whatever it does, voice, it's because that's the CDP vendor's job. That their job is to build systems that can handle whatever you throw at it. And it's really important that you have somebody who's focused on that, so you don't have to be.
Excellent. Why don't we, we'll get to the rest of the questions here in a second, but David, I thought you've done some great work talking with, hundreds of folks out there, and, I think it might be interesting to chat through some of these objections that exist out there. The top one, which I love, is too good to be true. Talk to me about that one.
Well, that's probably the most common objection, like, nah, these people are just, blowing smoke. But the reality is, like, not only is it too good to be true, but it's there. I mean, people do these things. All the vendors have case studies. There's plenty of success stories. So it's just, again, come back to the awareness thing. It really is true. This thing does exist, and they're real, and they work, and you can talk to people who have used them successfully, and you should do that if you're skeptical of it. But don't let that stop you. Don't just dismiss it out of hand.
Totally. I think also in line with this, hey, our tech folks are smart. They can do this. And sure, yeah, I'm sure there are super smart folks inside of all the organizations that are on this call today that can build really amazing technology. But from our perspective, they should be building amazing technology. They should just not have to worry about building the thousands of integrations that you may need and dealing with the transformation of data and all of that. They should be building on top of that. They should be building really amazing, compelling experiences on top of it. Because this, I think software like a CDP allows you just to be faster to market, and not to mention probably a whole lot cheaper than building something from scratch from the ground up. Just in the interest of time, David, would be curious around some of the roadblocks that people think maybe CDPs can't speed some of this stuff up.
I'm sorry, say that one again.
No problem. So the roadblocks. One of the objections are hey, we've got other fish to fry. We've got bigger problems in our organization than just the technology, and I don't necessarily think that CDPs alone can speed this up. What do you say there?
Absolutely. We say is yes, that's true, and it's just a technology. It's not a miracle cure for everything that ails your company, but it does remove some of the roadblocks. It highlights some of the other roadblocks. A lot of the objections that people might use as excuses about cost and time and stuff kind of go away. So the CDP, it can't solve your problems in that regard, but it can actually make it a little easier to address and see and ultimately get resolution to those problems. So it helps.
Absolutely. And we'll move on here, but one other that popped out at me is, our staff can't use some of the CDP outputs that are there. And I would say, what? I challenge you to go and explore what pre-built integrations these CDPs have, because chances are they'll do the heavy lifting and they'll just make those systems that you have, your email systems, your marketing automation, your personalization systems, they'll make them light up with new data, and that's something that every organization can use. So David, I'll turn it over to you for a couple minutes, and we'll make sure that we save a couple minutes before the top of the hour to talk through some of the other questions, but let's talk around how I need to select and choose a CDP.
Absolutely, and we will have to move kind of quickly through this, but the bottom line is it's like any other piece of technology or software, right? You're going to have a selection process, and you really have to buy a system that meets your needs. As I just said earlier, there's a lot of variety in CDPs. It's not just, yes, I need a CDP, it's choosing the right CDP. So what applications are you going to do? What are you going to do with the thing? It's always where you start. Then once you know the applications, where's that data going to come from? What kind of processing does it have to do? What systems are going to have to connect to on the other end to deliver, to execute the applications? Now I can begin to, now that I know what my requirements are, I can look at my gaps versus what I currently have available. Then I can figure out, okay, what do I need to do to fill the gaps, and definitely think of non-technical things like skills and processes and organization. And once I know that, now finally and only then can I actually begin to look at vendors and say, okay, these are the specific problems or gaps that I have to close. Which CDP vendors really fit against that? And we've given you here a list of some of the things that are differentiators among the CDPs. All CDPs meet the general criteria. Here are things that some do better than others or differently than others. What connectors do they have, and specifically do they connect to the systems that I have in place or I'm going to have in place in the future that I need to connect to? How do they connect? What kinds of data do they store? How good are they at real time, if real time matters? It doesn't always matter. And real time is a complicated topic. It's not just about loading the data in, it's about getting it through and making it accessible on the other end and responding. Is 1 second real time? Well, yes, it is in some cases. Is 50 milliseconds real time? In some cases, that's the requirement. So real time is tricky. GDPR we talked about. Do I want anonymous as well as identified profiles? I always want identified. I may or may not need anonymous depending again on my business. What kind of identity matching? What kind of external access? What am I going to do if I want the applications built in? What applications do I want built in? So those are the kind of things that when you look at your requirements, you have to say, okay, these are the things you want to kind of define in some detail because those are the things that you're going to look at to differentiate one CDP vendor from another. That was a very quick engagement there.
Well, let's dive into a couple of the questions that are here. So I think, thinking about one that I think we can talk about real quick, what about low-touch industries like insurance? We don't necessarily want to interact all the time. I think that's one of the things that I think can commonly get confused with the CDP, that it's all about action. It's all about sending that email or putting someone in a retargeting campaign or taking action. It's a lot of times, making sure that you're just connecting systems. So that way, if someone is performing an action online and they pick up the phone to call, connecting that data so that I can understand, one, what that person is doing when they call, but maybe at a macro level, let's look at what led them to have to pick up the phone, and let's measure and experiment with ways to maybe make sure that we're building better experiences that deflect that call from happening. And so we can really think about a CDP as connecting the data to help me build that story, help me build the metrics in place to understand, are we successful in some of these efforts that we're trying to solve. David, another question that popped up that I think might be interesting is, of the system, what does a CDP not offer that requires marketers to continue to integrate with other systems? So, I think you can look at this. I think this is probably mentioned around your slide that talks about EDWs and others. Curious, some closing thoughts on, is there anything that a CDP is not doing, or anything that, or is that really just a misconception of what people are thinking about other technologies and what they're purpose-built for?
Well, certainly a CDP doesn't do everything. No one would claim that it does, and I don't think anyone should. Again, some CDPs do things like having decision engines and machine learning and message selection and stuff like that. Some don't. Some do more or less degrees of segmentation and clustering and that kind of work. So it really depends. I mean, the core of the CDP is just to build that database and make it available. That's what a CDP does. The other stuff, a lot of the vendors do for a lot of reasons. Some came from different places and had it built in. Some found that their customers wanted it. It was easy to provide it. So, there's a wide variety. And again, you just have to figure out what you need. Because if you have a great email engine, then you don't care if the email is a function of the CDP. If you don't have one, you might want it. Same for everything else.
David, thank you so much. There are a few other questions that we didn't get to on the call today, which we will follow up directly and chat through those. As closing thoughts, we'll also have a really great paper coming out from David that we'll be sharing with everyone who attended today, really drilling in a little bit deeper into this area of how CDPs help solve some of the problems that face marketers. As mentioned earlier, the slides from today's presentation will be shared with you as well, and we'll also be inviting you to an upcoming webinar where we're drilling in one step deeper on how CDPs solve some of the tactical problems that marketers face in this era of change. So we thank you very much for joining. David, thank you for joining today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.